The United Galactic Senate Chamber was a kaleidoscope of alien species, their voices weaving an intricate hum of diplomacy. Every seat was filled, from the avian-like representatives of the Vree Coalition to the crystalline forms of the Zynex Hive. In the center, beneath a towering dome of shimmering light, humanity's representative, Marcus Callan, sat with a steely calm. A veteran diplomat in his 40s, his chiseled face bore the lines of countless battles fought with words instead of weapons. Today was supposed to be routine, a series of mundane trade agreements and territorial debates. That changed the moment the chamber's central holoscreen crackled to life unbidden. A sharp, mechanical tone echoed, silencing the delegates. Marcus's keen blue eyes locked on the screen as static gave way to a brutal image. A desolate expanse stretched into the distance, where 50,000 beings stood under an alien sun, their faces gaunt with despair. A commanding voice boomed across the chamber, deep and dripping with menace. It was unmistakable. Supreme Commander Vreltak of the Galactic Empire. The reptilian warlord stood in his obsidian armor, his crimson eyes glinting with sadistic delight. "These are the consequences of defiance," Vreltak declared. The inhabitants of Arathios, 9 violated imperial sovereignty, engaging in acts of espionage against the Empire. Justice has been served. Before anyone could process the words, the screen shifted. Rows of execution drones descended upon the colony's inhabitants. Pulses of light erupted, merciless and swift. Cries of terror and defiance rang out, echoing in the stunned silence of the Senate chamber. Marcus clenched his fists under the table, his knuckles whitening. His jaw tightened, but his expression betrayed none of the fury coursing through him. He could feel the weight of thousands of eyes turning toward him, the unspoken question in their gazes. What will humanity do? The broadcast ended abruptly, leaving only a faint hum of static. The chamber erupted into chaos. "This is an outrage," barked a representative from the Luthor Alliance, his frilled neck flaring with indignation. "The Empire has gone too far," but others remained eerily quiet. Marcus's gaze swept over the assembly, noting the nervous shifting and whispered exchanges among the more cautious delegations. Fear of the Empire's wrath held many tongues in check. He stood, the heavy fabric of his diplomatic robe brushing the polished floor. The murmurs subsided as his voice, calm yet resonant, cut through the cacophony. "Fellow delegates," he began, his tone measured but edged with steel, "what we have witnessed is not justice. It is tyranny cloaked in the pretense of law." A ripple of agreement passed through the chamber, though some still avoided his gaze. The colonists of Arathios, 9 were unarmed civilians. Farmers, scientists, families. They were executed not because they were spies, but because they were an example. A message to all of us. Submit or suffer. A delegate from the Galactic Trade Federation, his bulbous eyes blinking rapidly, interrupted. "Ambassador Callan, while we all sympathize, the Empire's territorial claims over Arathios, 9 were unsubstantiated." Marcus cut in, his voice sharp. Arathios, 9 was a neutral colony, established with the Senate's blessing. If the Empire can slaughter its inhabitants without consequence, what colony will be next? Whose people will they target when it suits their agenda? The chamber fell silent. Even the most hesitant delegates could not deny the truth in his words. Marcus scanned the room, his gaze lingering on familiar faces, some allies, others adversaries. Taking a deep breath, he continued, "If the Senate fails to act, it abdicates its responsibility to protect the innocent. Humanity demands justice, not just for our people, but for all who value freedom over fear." The room buzzed with renewed energy, the balance of opinion beginning to shift. Yet Marcus knew this was only the beginning. He could see the doubt lingering in the eyes of the more powerful factions. As he sat, a soft chime signaled the end of the session. Marcus remained still, his mind racing. He thought of his younger brother, Ethan, who had moved to Aratheos 9 to start a new life. The thought that he might have been among the executed colonists was a knot of cold iron in his chest, one he could not yet afford to unravel. As the delegates filed out, Marcus's assistant lieutenant Aaron Steele approached. A former soldier, Steele's presence was a stark contrast to the polished diplomat surrounding them. "You handled that well, sir," Steele said, his voice low. "But you've painted a target on humanity's back." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. "If standing for justice makes us a target, then so be it." Steele nodded, his expression unreadable. "What's our next move?" Marcus rose, his resolve hardening. "We make them listen, one way or another." The chamber's lights dimmed as the last of the delegates departed. Marcus lingered for a moment, staring at the now empty holoscreen. The images of the executions replayed in his mind, each face a reminder of what was at stake. This was no longer just a diplomatic battle. It was a fight for the soul of the galaxy. The human embassy on the edge of the Galactic Senate District was both fortress and sanctuary. Its stark metallic exterior reflected humanity's pragmatic approach to interstellar politics, while its interior pulsed with a quiet hum of activity. Marcus Callan sat in the center of a war room, surrounded by a holographic projection of Aratheos 9. The images of its now lifeless surface were grainy but haunting, a silent accusation that weighed heavily on his shoulders. Lieutenant Aaron Steele, standing rigid beside the projection, broke the silence. "We need to hit them back, Marcus. The Empire only understands strength." Marcus rubbed his temples, exhaustion threatening to dull his focus. "And what strength do we have, Aaron? We're not the Terran fleet. We're diplomats." Steele's expression tightened, his military bearing faltering for a moment. 50,000 dead. We can't just talk our way out of this. Before Marcus could respond, another voice cut in. Dr. Julian Hart, the embassy's chief strategist, leaned forward, his wiry frame backlit by the holograms. "He's not wrong, Marcus, but the solution isn't brute force. We need leverage allies. If we strike now, we'll be crushed before we even begin." Marcus exhaled slowly, his gaze flicking between the two men. Steele was raw, a soldier barely restrained by the diplomatic leash, while Hart represented the calculated precision that politics demanded. Both were right in their own ways, and yet both were missing the bigger picture. "We don't have time for hypotheticals," Marcus said, his voice steady. "The Senate will reconvene in 48 hours. If we don't secure a majority vote to investigate the Empire, the massacre will be buried under bureaucracy." Hart nodded, his expression grim. "We need to shift the narrative. The neutral factions might be swayed if we show them they're just as vulnerable as Aratheos 9. Steele's eyes narrowed. "Fear-mongering? That's a slippery slope." "It's not fear-mongering," Marcus replied sharply. "It's the truth. The Empire's aggression won't stop with us." A soft chime interrupted their discussion. Marcus gestured, and the holograms vanished, replaced by a smaller projection of Senator Jcale, a reptilian delegate from the Neutral Planets Coalition. His emerald-scaled face filled the room, his yellow eyes scrutinizing Marcus with calculated interest. "Ambassador Callan," Jcale hissed, his voice smooth yet unyielding. "I trust this isn't a social call." Marcus clasped his hands behind his back. "Senator, I'll be blunt. The Empire's actions on Aratheos 9 set a precedent that threatens every neutral colony in the galaxy. If they can slaughter civilians without consequence, what's to stop them from targeting your worlds next?" Jcale tilted his head, his expression inscrutable. "You assume the coalition will act on emotion. We prefer caution over confrontation." "Caution?" Steele muttered under his breath, earning a sharp glance from Marcus. Marcus stepped closer to the projection. "Senator, I'm not asking for direct confrontation. I'm asking for unity. A coalition investigation would show the Empire that they can't act with impunity. It's a step toward accountability. Chgale's eyes flicked to the side, as if considering unseen counsel. Finally, he said, I'll bring this to my colleagues, but understand, Ambassador, neutrality comes at a cost. If your request jeopardizes our position, you'll stand alone. The projection blinked out, leaving the room in silence. Steele was the first to speak. He won't commit. None of them will. Marcus sat down heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. Maybe not yet, but we have to keep pushing. The next day, Marcus stood in the Senate chamber, his voice carrying over the hum of restless delegates. Colleagues, I come before you not as a representative of humanity, but as a voice for the silenced. The people of Arathios, 9 were not soldiers. They were scientists, farmers, families. They dreamed of a future where their children could thrive in peace. That dream was extinguished by the Empire's ruthless hand. A murmur rippled through the assembly, but Marcus pressed on. Do not mistake the Empire's actions as isolated. They are testing us, probing the limits of what we will tolerate. If we do nothing, we send a message. That power, not principle, governs this chamber. Several delegates nodded, their expressions shifting from apathy to contemplation. Even Senator Chgale seemed to watch with renewed interest. But as Marcus concluded, a voice rang out from the Galactic Trade Federation's delegation. Ambassador Callan, we sympathize with your loss, but sanctions against the Empire could destabilize the economy. We cannot risk interstellar trade over one colony. Anger flared in Marcus's chest, but he masked it with a calm exterior. How many colonies will it take? How many lives must be lost before we act? The chamber fell silent, the weight of his words lingering. As the session adjourned, Marcus retreated to the embassy, his mind racing. Chgale had approached him after the session, offering cryptic support, a list of smaller factions willing to provide intelligence but unwilling to act openly. It was a start, but far from the decisive backing he needed. Later that night, Marcus stared at a faded hollow image of his younger brother, Ethan. He had been smiling, his arms slung around a group of colonists in the golden fields of Arathios 9. The image was a painful reminder of what had been lost and what was at stake. Steele entered, breaking the silence. I spoke to a few off-record contacts. There's chatter about the Empire planting evidence to justify the massacre. If we can get proof... Marcus looked up, the fire reigniting in his eyes. Then we'll have something the Senate can't ignore. Steele nodded. I'll make the arrangements. But this could get dangerous. Marcus's voice was firm. Dangerous or not, we don't have a choice. The Senate chamber was a symphony of discordant voices. Delegates argued, alliances frayed, and the weight of inaction hung heavy in the air. Marcus Callan stood in the center, flanked by Lieutenant Steele and Dr. Hart, both silent but watchful. The stakes had never been higher. Marcus's speech earlier in the week had ignited debate, but failed to secure a decisive outcome. Now, the chamber awaited his next move, many expecting another plea for justice. Instead, Marcus intended to upend the narrative entirely. He stepped forward, his voice carrying with unwavering clarity. Esteemed delegates, I stand before you not with words but with proof. The massacre on Arathios 9 was not an act of justice. It was a premeditated atrocity designed to sow fear and consolidate the Empire's control. The room stilled. Even the most skeptical factions leaned forward, their attention caught. Marcus gestured to Steele, who activated a hollow projection. Images flickered to life. Decrypted communications from the Empire's military command, evidence of fabricated espionage claims, and detailed plans for the Operation Cleansing Fire that preceded the massacre. The final piece was a grainy video from the surface of Arathios 9, showing Empire soldiers executing unarmed civilians while laughing. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Marcus let the silence linger before speaking again. This evidence was not easily obtained. My people risked their lives to bring the truth to light. If this chamber refuses to act, then we are complicit in the Empire's crimes. Supreme Commander Vreltak's holographic form materialized abruptly, his crimson eyes glowing with fury. The sudden interruption sent a ripple of unease through the assembly. You dare accuse the Empire? Vreltak's voice was a venomous snarl. Your so-called proof is nothing more than propaganda. Erathios, 9 was a nest of spies and dissidents. Justice was served. Marcus faced a towering projection without flinching. Justice? Executing families in cold blood is not justice. It is cowardice. The chamber erupted into chaos, delegates shouting over one another. Vreltak's image loomed above it all, his presence a reminder of the Empire's power. Enough! Marcus's voice thundered, silencing the room. He turned to the assembly, his expression a mix of determination and defiance. The question is no longer about the Empire's guilt. The evidence is clear. The question is what we will do about it. He stepped closer to the central podium, his voice steady and commanding. Will we allow fear to dictate our actions? Or will we stand united against tyranny? The Empire thrives on division, but together, we can show them that their reign of terror has limits. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then Senator Jkale rose from his seat, his reptilian face unreadable. Ambassador Callan is correct. The Neutral Planets Coalition will support an investigation into the Empire's actions. If we fail to act, we betray the very principles the Senate was founded upon. One by one, other delegates stood. The Trelvian Confederacy, the Luther Alliance, even members of the Galactic Trade Federation voiced their support. A wave of solidarity spread through the chamber, forcing the Empire's allies into uncomfortable silence. Vreltak's hologram flickered, his rage barely contained. You have made a grave mistake, Callan. The Empire does not forgive. War will come, and humanity will be the first to fall. Marcus met his glare, his voice unshaken. If war is the price of justice, then so be it. But know this, Vreltak. Humanity does not stand alone. The hologram vanished, leaving the chamber in a heavy silence. Later, in the human embassy, Marcus sat with steel and heart, the tension of the day's events still palpable. That was a gamble, Hart said, his tone cautious. Vreltak won't back down. Marcus nodded, his exhaustion showing in the faint lines around his eyes. I know, but we've forced the Senate to act. That's more than we had yesterday. Steele, leaning against the wall, crossed his arms. We've painted a bigger target on ourselves. The Empire won't just retaliate with words. Marcus met his gaze, his voice steady. Let them come. If we don't stand for something now, then everything we've built, everything we are, means nothing. The room fell silent, each man lost in his own thoughts. The next morning, the Senate convened in an emergency session. A resolution to launch an independent investigation into the Empire passed with an overwhelming majority. The Galactic Senate's unity was a fragile thing, but it was enough to send a message. The Empire's actions would no longer go unchallenged. As Marcus left the chamber, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over him. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Empire would retaliate, and humanity would need to prepare for the storm ahead. Standing at the embassy's balcony that night, Marcus gazed at the stars. Somewhere out there, Ethan's memory lived on, not in the ashes of Erathios 9, but in the fight for justice that had begun in its name. The galaxy was watching, and Marcus Callan would ensure they saw what humanity was truly capable of.